Hey, welcome back to the Disney Plus Everyday Challenge, and today we have Davy Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier. This is uh, a feature that was sort of cobbled together in 1955 out of Magical World of Disney episodes, I believe. It's like three different stories cobbled together into one, so it runs about an hour and 33 minutes long, and yeah, it's the Legend of Davy Crockett, and Walt Disney, of course, loved the Old West and things like that, and he made an entire land in Disneyland out of it, Frontierland. In fact, I think some of the early days of Disneyland, Fess Parker, who played the iconic role, actually did appear in costume in Frontierland from time to time. And you have to understand, Davy Crockett in that time, it's a generation before mine, uh, so I don't fully understand it. I'm trying to think of the equivalent of my generation. It'd be like Luke Skywalker or Han Solo, basically showing up. But this is based on a real guy. Davy Crockett was a real person. Now, these stories here are mostly exaggerations, myths, and legends. Even the song talks about how he killed a bear at only three. It's like he was the ultimate frontiersman, the ultimate. He was in touch with the land, the animals, the creatures, the people that they called Injuns. Yes, that part hasn't really aged that well. But the thing is, it wasn't just like a cowboys and Indians thing. It was they were at war. The colonialists were at war with the Native Americans and different tribes. Some of them had gone into an agreement, a treaty of sorts, which well, we won't go into that. But you got these. There's some rogue tribes, I guess, that were very much intent on doing some scalping. Yeah, and in this, that sort of fueled a lot of I don't know, excitement with kids of that era who put on a coonskin cap. Some people grew up just wearing that coonskin cap everywhere you go. If you watch Leave It to Beaver, if anybody knows what that is, and they look back at that era, I'm pretty sure. I don't know if it's Wally or who it is. Stuff from that era. Kids loved Davy Crockett. Again, real person. He actually was part of the House of Representatives at one point, representing Tennessee. Uh, but he was also just. I mean, he was kind of like in a sense, a mercenary for hire. In a sense where he wasn't part of the army, he was a hunter. He was a explorer in the way the stories are told. Now understand that his best friend, Russell, yeah, George Russell, played by Buddy Ebsen, which you might know him as Jed Clampett from Beverly Hillbillies in later years, and many other roles, but mainly Jed Clampett. So, but he was also, for anybody prior to that, they knew him as Davy Crockett's best friend, his Chewbacca, basically, his side right hand man, as what can I say, the name George Russell. And George is supposedly responsible for making up these elaborate stories that built upon the legend. In fact, this movie even touches on the fact that Davy was pretty much aware of his legend. Like, yeah, he played it up sometimes when he was meeting people for the first time. He seems like he was when we first see him in this. The military is trying to get his help in finding some engines. So he, even though he has friendships with various tribes and peoples, Native Americans, he also fought against them and shot a bunch of them. But when he first is introduced, they're hunting him down, the military, to get his help. It turns out that he was trying to defeat a bear with a grin, just smiling at him, showing his teeth, and yeah, so that was interesting. So yeah, that kind of goofy confidence adds a lot of humor to this because they play up the legend. It's he's I at one point I had to almost remind myself that yes, this was a real person, not just a caricature. Well, it is a caricature. It is really much a character, but it's not a character made of full cloth. Um, I mean, like the Lone Ranger, also from the Wild West, was based on a real person, but it was not the Lone Ranger we saw in the old serials, the black and white stories with Tonto, which also has not aged well. Certainly not as Johnny Depp playing it. Lone Ranger was based on a black man. So, yeah, that wasn't going to fly in Hollywood. Certainly not 60, 70, 80, 100 years ago, however long it was when they started making those serials. Davy Crockett here, real guy, you see him, it's weird seeing him out of his, like, leatherware. Well, not leatherware, but I mean, his nature togs, his nature outfit. When he dresses up to speak at the Assembly of the House of Representatives, especially when everybody loves him, and he has to speak out against them because they used him to distract people. It's a very political. It's actually in the very middle part of the film. There's three stories dealing with the military and the the Indians in a prolonged many-step battle, and you get to meet his family a little bit too. The second story deals with him trying to find land and fighting a guy named Bigfoot. Yeah. I gotta remember his name. He also appeared in here it is, Mike Mazurki, Bigfoot Mason. He also appeared in one of my favorite films, Some Like It Hot, as a gangster. But that has nothing to do with anything. But still, in the second one, he sort of frees a town from the criminal exploits of these thugs, and then gets the idea, people give him the idea, why don't you just represent the people of Tennessee and set things right, become not a politician, but join them. And I see some parallels to this guy, that somebody might have watched these things and thought he was doing that, but turned out to be a criminal in the end. Who am I talking about? I have no idea. Yeah, he's a guy, he's a bit of an outsider, and he spent his time moving from up and down the East Coast, visiting different towns, and all the while, the people that he trusted were conspiring behind his back to change the laws when it came to dealing with the Native Americans and the tribes, trying to break the treaties, and he gives them an earful when he gets back in his very Davy Crockett way. So yeah, it's that's a very different story than the first one. And that breaks it up because eventually, in the third story, he ends up at the Alamo, and if you know what happens at the Alamo, if you know your history, if you're from Texas especially, you know that it's not a happy ending. No, even for Davy Crockett, and yes, Davy Crockett was at the Alamo along with Jim Bowie, the guy who made the Bowie knife, and a few other notable people went up against the armies of Santa Anna and the Spanish armies, and that's why we say remember the Alamo, because it was barely 200 men that stood up against an army of thousands, and legend has it that well, of course he died. Spoiler, sorry, history lesson. They died. The good guys lost, and I was wondering the whole time how they would deal with this. Like, this is a movie that really celebrates this character. It's just like makes it. They build on the myths, they exaggerate on it, and honestly, it's kind of weird that they haven't made a new version of this. I guess they might have had Lone Ranger done well, because it harkens back to a hero archetype, an American hero archetype that may not translate well into modern times. I don't know. Again, I don't know why Lone Ranger didn't do well, because it just didn't grab a modern audience of many generations later. I enjoy the film regardless of the problems it has afterwards or as a result of their lead actors, but that's neither here nor there. It was still a fun film, and great score and everything else. But when it comes to this, which is again firmly set in the heyday of Davy Crockett, the celebration of the character and kids loving the Wild West. This is before space became the new thing, sci-fi, and or just space travel. The idea of us going to the moon and things like that. Because eventually, I mean, we moved from cowboys and Indians to aliens and spaceships, and then rock and roll. I don't know. It was the Beatles and the Elvis and everything else. But yeah, it's the kind of thing that I expected this to not age well, and this very much the Native American part of it has not. But one of the things that a good chunk of it has not. But at least it's accurate to the time, I'm guessing. That it's not like a whole lot of people are going to be PC about how they dealt with Indians. But Davy Crockett has always been one who stood up, even in this time. There's no retrofitting or reshoots or anything else in this. In this time, even though they're depicted as savages, and half the time it seems like they're depicted by white people who have nice hands, not all of them, but Davy Crockett is a guy who stands up for all people, regardless of who they are, and he understands, he communicates with them, he has friends with many of them, and he works to protect their rights. Now, whether the government was ever going to be really good about any of that, well, we know kind of how that all worked out for the most part today. Yeah. Reservations, anyone? Anybody have reservations? Yeah. But yeah, there's politics and history aside, this makes for an entertaining, just sort of throwback kind of movie. It is a product of its time, and there's nothing to be apologetic for, I guess. I don't know. Maybe I didn't look at the screen. Maybe there's like a depictions, like a thing at the very beginning where it's like depictions here are not really good. And they weren't good then, they aren't good now. Disney put some of that stuff in front of a lot of these things. And I may not have been looking at the screen at the time they were doing that because it's silent. And so I didn't look at the screen after I hit play. I don't know. Maybe they don't. But either way, Davy Crockett was a guy who stood up for all people, regardless, and used his fame and turned it into power when he joined the government. And then he used that after his time in government, went and fought for freedom at the Alamo, regardless of how that turned out. So yeah, I spoiled the entire movie for you, but odds are you already knew. If yes, you're old enough to have seen this film. If you're really young and you're like, well, I'm going to just listen to this random guy talk about this Davy Crockett movie, I don't know if there's anybody out there who's young enough to not know who Davy Crockett is and is one coming to me to go, you know what, I think that guy has all the opinions, the things I need to know. Yeah, that's that person doesn't exist. So, like, at least not yet. Until I get my fame and the myth and legends are all built up around me. Yeah, that would be neat. Just tell my story. Anyway, King of the Wild Frontier. We've already seen the River Pirates one, so I think it's the only two Davy Crockett movies that are on Disney Plus right now. I'm sure there are more, but again, maybe I'm thinking that there was lots of episodes, and like I said, this is made up of 3 different episodes crammed together into one, and it flows pretty nicely. But you can see where it differs. So you can take a break at 2 different points in this thing and be perfectly fine. Taking a bathroom break and not miss out on any of the story. All right. I think I've said way too much about Davy Crockett. It's a fairly simple film, and it really doesn't need that much analysis. But, I started and I couldn't stop. Let's keep going with tomorrow's episode.
570.
570. Oh, man, we're jumping all over the place. 570. That's almost at the end. Oh, jeez. It's a movie. It's from Pixar. then. So think alphabetically, not the very alphabetically last one, which was a Disney animated feature, which would have been Zootopia, which we've already watched. Think alphabetically later in the pile of Pixar films, and you would be picking WALL-E. I have not seen WALL-E in forever, so I am looking forward to watching that. That's what we're watching next. Pixar's WALL-E on the next Disney Plus Everyday Challenge. I'll see you back here tomorrow with that.